The most dangerous person in a room is never the loudest one. It's the one everyone overlooks. We live in a world that celebrates the showman, the bold, and the brilliant. But we often forget that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply waits for the perfect moment to act. This is a story that proves that very theory in the most spectacular way imaginable. It's about what happens when a powerful TV host decides to publicly mock a seemingly invisible contestant, not knowing that he was poking a lioness and that she was the secret producer silently holding his entire career in her hands. Get ready, because you are about to witness a story of arrogance and consequence that is almost too good to be true. On one side, you have Louis Spencer, a charismatic king of television who believes he's untouchable, his world built on ratings and the casual humiliation of others. On the other, you have Melissa Russell, a quiet, unassuming woman who steps onto his stage with nothing but a guitar and a heart full of sincerity. The moment their worlds collide on live television is the spark that ignites a firestorm of emotional twists and turns, leading to a conclusion that is the very definition of a plot twist. We're going to dive deep into how a single moment of public mockery set the stage for an incredible journey of overcoming, quiet revenge, and unexpected justice. This is for anyone who has ever been belittled and dreamed of the day they could silently turn the tables. The story of Louis and Melissa proves a powerful belief: the person you underestimate the most might just be the one holding all the cards. We'll follow Melissa's undercover mission from the inside, leading to a final verdict that left the man who humiliated her utterly speechless. But this story goes even deeper than a simple tale of comeuppance. It forces us to ask a powerful question. When you finally hold all the power against someone who wronged you, do you choose righteous justice, or do you opt for cold, satisfying revenge? And what happens when the lines get blurry? What happens when you start to see the humanity in the monster you set out to destroy, and an unexpected love story begins to complicate the entire mission? The answer is a journey so emotional it will challenge everything you think you know about second chances. Before we dive into this incredible story of twists and turns, I want to know how far our message is reaching. Please comment below what beautiful city you're watching from right now. I'd love to imagine the scenery along with you. And if you believe in the power of a fateful plot twist, don't forget to like this video, follow our channel so you don't miss any part of this journey, and share it with that one person you know will be touched by this story. Here we go. There's a certain kind of confidence that comes with being on top, the kind that feels like it's made of steel and flashing lights. Louis Spencer, the celebrated TV host, wore this confidence like a custom-tailored suit. Every night he walked onto that stage bathed in applause, his smile a weapon of mass charm. He was the king of this small, glittering kingdom, and everyone in it was merely a part of his court. He didn't just host the show, he believed he was the show. And that belief, well, it can make a man blind to the things that truly matter. It's a funny thing. Power, it can make you feel invincible, right before it shows you how fragile you really are. On this particular night, a woman named Melissa Russell stepped into the spotlight. She wasn't the usual type of contestant who graced his stage, all sequins and desperate ambition. She was plain simple, an unassuming figure in a world that screamed for attention. To Louis, she was just another face in the crowd, a momentary distraction before the next commercial break. He sized her up in a split second, his mind already crafting the perfect witty dismissal. He saw her as a stepping stone for his own nightly performance, someone to make an example of, and he couldn't have been more wrong. It was a classic miscalculation, a fatal underestimation born from pure arrogance. When Melissa began her performance, it was quiet, heartfelt, and deeply sincere. It wasn't loud or explosive, it was genuine, a small flame of authenticity in a forest of artificiality. For a moment, a real emotional connection flickered through the audience. But Louis Spencer didn't deal in genuine emotion, he dealt in ratings and punchlines. He saw her vulnerability not as a strength, but as a target. You could almost see the gears turning in his head as he prepared to turn her quiet moment into a spectacle of his own making, a joke that would land him on the morning talk shows. His job, as he saw it, was to entertain, even if it meant extinguishing someone else's light. And then he struck. With a charming smirk plastered on his face, the TV host leaned into his microphone and let the words fly. He mocked her simple dress, he humiliated her for her earnestness, twisting her heartfelt performance into a caricature for the laughing masses. The joke was cruel, wrapped in the shiny paper of primetime television humor. The audience roared, just as he knew they would. For a fleeting second, he felt that familiar rush of power, the validation of a crowd in the palm of his hand. He had asserted his dominance, reminding everyone who was in charge of this stage and this narrative. He was the star, and she was just a footnote. But something unexpected happened. As the laughter washed over her, Melissa Russell didn't cry. She didn't shrink or run off the stage. She simply stood there, her expression unreadable, a quiet poise surrounding her like a shield. It was an act of overcoming so subtle that most people missed it. She absorbed the humiliation without breaking, her dignity intact. This unexpected reaction was a small surprise that threw Louis off his rhythm for just a millisecond. He expected tears, a dramatic exit, something that would feed the drama machine. Instead, he got calm. A calm that felt unnervingly powerful. Almost like a silent warning he couldn't decipher. He was left momentarily speechless, not by a clever comeback, but by her sheer refusal to be broken. He quickly recovered, of course, dismissing her with a final wave and moving on to the next segment. But the image of her quiet strength lingered, a tiny splinter in his perfectly polished persona. He didn't know it yet, couldn't possibly comprehend it, but that single moment was the beginning of the end for his reign. The woman he had just publicly humiliated wasn't just another contestant, she was, in fact, the secret producer watching everything undercover. And a powerful storm of karma was about to find its way to his doorstep. It's a funny thing about power. Sometimes the best way to wield it is to pretend you have none at all. Melissa Russell, the newly minted executive producer, understood this better than anyone. She had been brought in to save a sinking ship, on a popular talent show now bleeding viewers and credibility. But you can't fix a problem until you know its true source, and reports and spreadsheets only tell you half the story. To get to the heart of the rot, she knew she had to go undercover, to see the world not from the executive suite, but from the stage floor. It was a risky move, a real gamble, but necessary. So she shed her power suit and her title, becoming just another hopeful face in the audition line. As a secret producer, she wasn't there to win, she was there to watch, to listen, and to feel. She wanted to experience the show as its contestants did, to understand their fears, their hopes, and the obstacles the production threw in their way. It was an intelligence mission of the highest order, a deep dive into her own territory to map out the minefield before she tried to clear it. She was hunting for the truth, and she suspected the biggest problem had a name and a primetime slot. The decision to become a contestant was a stroke of genius. It gave her unparalleled access, placing her right in the lion's den without the lion ever knowing. Crew members talk differently when they think no one important is listening. Contestants share their real frustrations and anxieties with one another in the hushed corners of the green room. Melissa absorbed it all, every whispered complaint, every arrow at an impossible demand, every frustrated sigh from an overworked production assistant. She was a ghost in her own machine, gathering the data that would fuel her quiet revolution. This journey of overcoming the show's internal decay from the inside was a lonely one. She had to pretend to be nervous, to be starstruck, to be just another number fighting for a dream she didn't actually want. Every interaction was a test of her resolve, a performance within a performance. She saw firsthand the casual disrespect, the disorganized chaos behind the seamless broadcast, and the toxic culture that trickled down from the very top. It was worse than she had imagined, and it all seemed to orbit one dazzling, charming, and utterly corrosive star, the TV host, Louis Spencer. Her goal wasn't just to identify problems, it was to understand the why. Why was morale so low? Why were talented people leaving? Why did a show about dreams feel so much like a machine that crushed them? Every clue, every piece of the puzzle, pointed back to the man at the center of it all. He was the sun in the solar system, but his light was burning everyone who got too close. Melissa knew that before she could bring any kind of justice to the crew, she had to understand the full extent of his influence. So she waited patiently for her turn, for her moment in front of him. This wasn't just an audition for a talent show, it was an audition for the truth. She needed to get close to Louis, to be in his direct line of fire, to experience his infamous personality firsthand. She had a hunch that the biggest problem wasn't a matter of budget or scheduling, but a matter of character. And as she stepped onto the stage, she prepared herself, knowing that to expose the poison, she might just have to let it bite her first. Let's talk about Louis Spencer for a moment. On camera, he was pure magic, a symphony of charisma and perfectly timed jokes. He could make a 5-minute interview feel like the most important conversation in the world. He was the nation's best friend. The charming TV host everyone invited into their living rooms every week. People didn't just watch him, they adored him. He had cultivated this persona so perfectly that he too had started to believe it. He wasn't playing a character anymore. He was convinced that the applause and the adoration were his birthright, a simple fact of life. But oh, the moment those cameras blinked off, a different man emerged. The warm smile would vanish, replaced by a look of sheer impatience and disdain. The friendly banter with the crew would curdle into sharp, condescending commands. He treated the people who made him look good as if they were invisible, mere servants to his talent. He saw the contestants not as hopeful artists, but as pathetic, fame-hungry amateurs who were lucky to breathe the same air as him. Behind the curtain, the king was not just naked, he was a tyrant in a $1,000 suit. His hypocrisy was a masterclass in itself. He would deliver a moving speech on air about the importance of chasing your dreams, leaving the audience emotional, only to turn around during the commercial break and berate a sound guy for a barely audible crackle in his earpiece. This duality was his secret, a well-guarded truth known only to those trapped in his orbit. They endured it because he was the star, the golden goose. Complaining meant risking your career, so they swallowed their pride and endured the quiet humiliation. All for the sake of the show. He truly believed his own hype, and that's a dangerous place for any man to be. He read his own press clippings, basked in his glowing reviews, and saw any form of criticism not as feedback, but as an insult from someone who simply didn't understand his genius. His ego was a fortress, impenetrable and vast, and from its highest tower, he looked down on everyone. This arrogance was a poison that had seeped into every corner of the production, creating an atmosphere of fear and resentment. It was a ticking time bomb, and no one knew when it would finally go off. The contestants especially bore the brunt of his off-camera scorn. Head mocked their outfits, their song choices, their hometowns, all with a quiet, cutting wit that left no room for a comeback. He saw their dreams as commodities to be exploited for a good story arc, a potential love story or a tale of overcoming he could use for ratings. He was a puppeteer, and everyone else was just a marionette whose strings he pulled for his own amusement and professional gain. He never considered them people, not really. They were just temporary props in the Louis Spencer show. This was the man Melissa Russell was about to face. She had heard the whispers, of course, but hearing is one thing and experiencing is another. As a secret producer, She knew this was the core issue she needed to address. The show wasn't just struggling, it was being actively poisoned by its biggest star. And she realized that fixing the show wouldn't be about new lighting or better talent scouting. No, it would be about dealing with the man on the throne, a man who had no idea that a quiet contestant was about to become his judge, jury, and perhaps his executioner. The moment arrived. The stage lights were blinding, the manufactured silence of the studio was deafening. Melissa Russell, in her carefully chosen, simple attire, stood before the man himself, Louis Spencer. She began her performance, a quiet, acoustic rendition of a classic song. It was stripped down, honest, and filled with a raw, emotional quality. She wasn't trying to be a superstar, she was trying to be real, to connect. In her undercover role as a contestant, this was the perfect bait. She was offering him a genuine moment, just to see what he would do with it. Louis watched from his host's pedestal, a bored, predatory stillness in his eyes. He let her sing just long enough for the audience to lean in, to feel something. And then, like a shark sensing blood, he saw his opening. He cut her off mid-verse, a theatrical hand raised for silence. The charming smile was back on his face, the one the cameras loved. But Melissa, standing just a few feet away, could see the coldness behind it. She saw the glint of condescension, the complete lack of respect for her or her art. This was it. The mask was about to slip. "Honey," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "That was sweet, really. It reminds me of something my grandmother would sing before her afternoon nap." He paused for effect as a ripple of laughter went through the audience. He wasn't done. "Tell me, does that guitar have any other songs in it? Or is it permanently set to depressing campfire mode?" The laughter grew louder, more confident. He had mocked her, turning her sincerity into a punchline. He humiliated her not with a roar, but with a silver-tongued whisper that cut deeper than any shout could. For Melissa, it was like watching a science experiment unfold exactly as predicted. She felt the sting of the public humiliation. Of course, Esh was only human. But beneath that, the secret producer in her was taking meticulous notes. This was his true nature, unfiltered and arrogant. He didn't just dislike her performance, he disdained it because it wasn't about him. It was quiet and it was real, two things that couldn't exist in his world of manufactured glitz. The cruel joke wasn't just an insult, it was a confession of his character, broadcast for the world to see. The audience, guided by the laugh track and years of conditioning, played their part perfectly. They saw a powerful TV host making a harmless joke at the expense of a non-contestant. They didn't see the casual cruelty or the crushing of a spirit for a cheap laugh. But Melissa saw it. The production crew, standing in the shadows, saw it too. They had seen it 100 times before. It was a clear demonstration of the toxic power dynamic that was bleeding the show dry. And now, the boss had witnessed it firsthand. As he dismissed her with a flippant wave, Louis felt a surge of satisfaction. He had created his moment of drama, entertained his crowd, and put another wannabe in her place. He had no idea that his little display of power was the final piece of evidence Melissa needed. He thought he was judging a lowly contestant, when in reality, he was standing trial. His joke hadn't just revealed his arrogance to her, it had sealed his fate, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to a reckoning he could never have anticipated. The path to justice had just been paved with his own ego. Walking off that stage, the echo of manufactured laughter still ringing in her ears, Melissa could have crumbled. Anyone else would have. The sting of being humiliated on a national platform is a potent venom. But Melissa Russell wasn't just anyone. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and let the emotional wave wash over her without letting it pull her under. This was part of the mission. Her experience, however painful, was valuable data. This act of overcoming the personal sting was a testament to her focus and her ultimate goal, fixing this broken culture. Backstage, in the dimly lit chaos of wires and stressed-out crew members, she saw a young singer huddled in a corner, tears welling in his eyes. He was next, and he had just witnessed Melissa's takedown. A few minutes earlier, Louis had made a snide off-camera remark about the kid's worn-out jacket, a comment small enough to go unnoticed by most, but sharp enough to pierce his confidence. Melissa saw a kindred spirit, another victim of the casual cruelty that pervaded this place. She could have walked past, lost in her own thoughts, but that wasn't who she was. She approached him quietly, not as a fellow contestant competing for a spot, but as a human being. "Hey," she said softly, her voice steady and kind. "Don't let him get to you. He's just playing a part for the cameras. What you do out there, that's real. Your voice is real. Don't let his noise drown out your music." Her words were simple, but they were delivered with a sincerity that cut through the young man's fear. It was a small gesture of solidarity in a brutally competitive environment, a moment of grace that felt like a surprise in such a cynical place. The young singer looked up, startled by the kindness from the very woman who had just been publicly mocked. He saw no bitterness in her eyes, no anger, only a quiet strength that was both comforting and inspiring. He managed a watery smile and nodded, taking a shaky breath. "Thank you," he whispered. In that moment, Melissa wasn't just the secret producer on an undercover mission, she was a leader. She was demonstrating the very thing the show lacked: empathy. She was planting a seed of a different kind of culture, one based on support rather than fear. This small act of kindness did not go unnoticed. A few junior crew members, accustomed to the dog-eating atmosphere, saw the exchange. They saw the woman who had every right to be angry or defeated choose compassion instead. It was a stark contrast to the TV host they worked for, a man who seemed to feed on the insecurities of others. It was a quiet moment, but it shifted something in the air. People started to see Melissa not as a victim, but as someone with an unshakable core of decency. And for Melissa, it reaffirmed her purpose. This wasn't just about saving a TV show's ratings, it was about restoring its soul. It was about creating an environment where artists could be vulnerable without being attacked, where kindness wasn't a weakness to be exploited. She had endured Louis' attack, and now she was helping someone else endure it too. The path to justice wasn't always a loud declaration sometimes. It started with a quiet word of encouragement in a darkened hallway. Louis Spencer had a simple philosophy: when you dismiss someone, they should stay dismissed. But Melissa Russell, the quiet contestant had tried to turn into a punchline, was still there. Week after week, she'd deliver a performance that was just good enough to squeak by, avoiding elimination by a hair's breadth. Her persistence was like a quiet hum beneath his loud symphony, and frankly, it was starting to get on his nerves. He had mocked her, humiliated her. Why hadn't she just taken the hint and disappeared? He couldn't stand the sight of her, a constant reminder of the moment her composure had slightly unnerved him. So he started to pull strings. It was easy for the star TV host to have a quiet word with a judge here, a voting tabulator there. He'd make casual remarks in production meetings. "Are we sure she's what the audience wants? She's a bit of a downer, don't you think?" He was subtly trying to poison the well, to ensure she was voted off. It was a petty abuse of power, but it was how he operated. He wanted her gone. Her presence felt like a quiet judgment, a constant silent accusation that he couldn't quite put his finger on, and he didn't like it one bit. But a funny thing was happening behind the scenes. The junior production staff, the ones who did the real work, had started to notice Melissa. They saw how she always knew her cues, how she treated every runner and intern with respect, how she offered to help coil a cable or fetch a coffee. Her sincerity was a breath of fresh air in the toxic atmosphere Louis had created. She wasn't playing the game of backstage politics, she was just being a decent human being. This quiet integrity began to win them over, creating a small but loyal pocket of support for her. They became her silent guardians. When they noticed her microphone pack had a faulty battery right before a performance, a young sound tech would discreetly swap it out. When her name was accidentally left off a rehearsal schedule, a production assistant would quietly add it back in. They were small acts of defiance, tiny rebellions against the king's silent decree. They were rooting for the underdog, the woman who showed them more kindness in a day than their famous boss had in a year. For them, seeing her succeed felt like a small taste of justice. This grassroots support was a surprise to the senior producers who were in Louis' pocket. They couldn't understand why this unremarkable contestant was still hanging on. The numbers weren't adding up to what Louis wanted, and the disconnect was baffling. They didn't realize that Melissa's influence was growing in the one place they never bothered to look: in the hearts of the people who were tired of being treated poorly. Her journey was becoming less about her own overcoming and more about theirs. Louis, of course, was oblivious to this subtle shift in allegiance. He was too high up in his ivory tower to notice the whispers in the hallways or the shared knowing glances between the crew. He just grew more irritated. His attempts to oust her were failing, and it made him feel impotent. He couldn't understand why his power wasn't working on this one quiet woman. He didn't know he was fighting a battle he couldn't win, because his opponent wasn't just Melissa Russell, it was the growing desire for basic human decency. The backstage area of a live TV show is a high-pressure cooker of controlled chaos. One evening, this pressure found a target. A young production assistant, barely out of college, handed Louis Spencer the wrong set of cue cards. It was a minor mistake, easily correctable. A single drop of water in an ocean of live television. But for Louis, it was an unforgivable sin, a personal affront to his perfection. The charming TV host persona evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, simmering rage that was far more terrifying. He cornered the PA in a hallway, away from most prying eyes, and unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse. His voice was low but sharp, each word a carefully crafted dart designed to wound. "Are you an idiot? Is this your first day on planet Earth? My entire monologue depends on these cards, and you give me garbage." The young man shrank under the assault, his face pale, stammering apologies that only seemed to enrage Louis further. He was making an example of him, asserting his dominance in the only way he knew how: by belittling someone powerless. Melissa, who had been coming from her dressing room, saw the whole exchange. The secret producer in her recognized this as a critical moment. This was the rot, exposed and festering. The contestant could have walked away, pretended she saw nothing, but Melissa Russell, the person, could not. She watched as the PA was humiliated, stripped of his dignity over a handful of paper. This wasn't just poor management, it was bullying. And it was happening on her show. A quiet authority settled over her as she decided, right then and there, that she would not be a bystander. She stepped forward into the hallway, her presence calm but unyielding. "It was an honest mistake," she said, her voice even and clear. It wasn't loud, but it cut through Louis' tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. Louis stopped mid-sentence, turning to face her with a look of utter disbelief. Who was this? This nobody contestant, this persistent gnat had been trying to swat, daring to interrupt him? The sheer audacity of it left him, for a second, completely stunned. It was a surprise so profound it actually silenced him. "He's been working for 16 hours straight," Melissa continued, her eyes locked on Louis, unwavering. "And sure, if you ask him nicely, he'll get you the right cards immediately." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her authority came not from a title or a threat, but from a place of unshakable conviction. She stood up for the PA, creating a protective shield with her quiet confidence. The young assistant looked at her with a mixture of terror and overwhelming gratitude. Someone was finally standing up to the tyrant. The tension in the hallway was thick enough to choke on. Louis Spencer, the great TV host, had been challenged, not by a network executive or a rival star, but by the very contestant he had mocked and dismissed. He was utterly thrown. He stared at her, trying to process what was happening. Her intervention was a plot twist in the daily drama of the show he hadn't seen coming. For the first time, someone had not only refused to fear him, but had openly and calmly defied him. And he had absolutely no idea what to do next. The moment the terrified production assistant scurried away with the wrong cue cards, Louis turned his full icy fury on Melissa. The initial surprise had worn off, replaced by a tidal wave of bruised ego. He strode towards her, invading her personal space, using his height and fame as tools of intimidation. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You are a contestant, a temporary guest in my world. You have no right to speak to me that way, let alone interfere in how I manage my set." He expected her to flinch, to apologize, to crumble under the weight of his anger. That's what everyone else did. He was Louis Spencer, and people cowered when he was angry. It was one of the unspoken rules of the show, but Melissa didn't back down. She held her ground, her posture relaxed but resolute. She didn't seem intimidated at all. In fact, she looked at him with an expression that was unnervingly calm, almost pitying. This refusal to play her assigned role in his drama only infuriated him more. He was the TV host, she was the nobody. Why wasn't she acting like it? He pressed on, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you're some kind of hero? Sticking up for the little guy? You don't know anything about this business. This is a high-pressure environment. We don't have time for coddling mistakes. We demand professionalism." He was trying to frame his cruelty as a professional standard, a necessary evil for the sake of excellence. It was the same justification Head used for years, the lie he told himself so he could sleep at night. He was testing her, trying to find a crack in her armor. Melissa listened patiently until he was finished. She didn't interrupt. When he finally fell silent, breathing heavily with a self-righteous glare, she let the silence hang in the air for a beat. Then, she met his gaze and delivered her response. It wasn't an attack, it wasn't a defense, and it wasn't an apology. It was a simple, profound statement of her core belief. Her voice was quiet, but it echoed in the narrow hallway with the force of a thunderclap. "I think I'm someone who believes kindness costs nothing," she said. That was it. No grand speech, no dramatic declaration. Just 10 simple words. But those words landed with a weight that caught Louis completely off guard. They were so simple, so pure, and so utterly alien in the cutthroat world he had built around himself. Kindness? Here, it was a foreign concept, a currency he hadn't dealt in for years. The statement was a mirror, and in it, he saw a reflection of himself he didn't like. The phrase lingered in the air long after she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. Kindness costs nothing. It was his simple truth. That felt like a complex puzzle. It replayed in his mind, unsettling him in a way no corporate memo or ratings drop ever could. It was a direct challenge to his entire worldview. For the first time in a long, long time, someone had made Louis Spencer feel small, not by shouting, but by holding up a standard of decency he knew he couldn't meet. The seed of a profound emotional shift had just been planted. That simple phrase, "kindness costs nothing," became a ghost that haunted Louis Spencer. He couldn't shake it. He started to watch her, Melissa Russell, this perplexing contestant who refused to fit into any box he tried to put her in. At first, he was looking for a weakness, a flaw, something he could use to justify his dislike of her. He watched her with the critical eye of a predator, waiting for a misstep. But what he saw instead began to dismantle his preconceived notions, brick by brick. He noticed how she moved through the backstage world. She wasn't just kind to the one PA she had defended, she was kind to everyone. She learned the names of the camera operators. She thanked the wardrobe assistants. She spent time with the other contestants, not scheming or competing, but genuinely helping them. He saw her coaching a nervous dancer on their breathing, helping a young singer rewrite a clunky lyric, sharing her water with someone who forgot theirs. She was a quiet force of positive energy in a building starved of it. What truly started to get his attention, though, were her ideas. He'd overhear her making quiet suggestions to the crew. To a lighting technician, she'd say, "What if you used a softer blue gel for this song? It might enhance the emotional mood." To a stage manager, she'd whisper, "If we move that platform 6 inches to the left, the sight lines would be perfect from camera 3. They were brilliant, professional suggestions that no ordinary contestant should have been able to make. And the crew, who already liked and respected her, started listening, and damn it, her ideas worked. The lighting for that performance was praised by critics. The camera shot from that new angle became a signature part of the show. She was subtly improving his show, right under his nose, for free. The changes were small, almost imperceptible on their own, but together they were making a difference. The show felt a little tighter, a little classier. It was a surprise that this woman had mocked as an amateur, possessed a professional savvy that rivaled his own. He found himself seeking her out in the crowd, watching her interactions, listening to her quiet conversations. It was a strange obsession. Part of him was still the arrogant TV host, annoyed that a nobody was having such an impact. But another part, a smaller, quieter part he hadn't heard from in years, was intrigued. He saw in her a genuine passion for the work, a love for the craft of television that he himself had lost somewhere along the way, buried under a mountain of ego and fame. This closer observation was the beginning of a profound shift in his perspective. He was seeing her not as the contestant he had humiliated, but as a multifaceted, intelligent, and deeply kind person. The foundation of his reality was starting to crack. He had built his kingdom on the idea that he was the sole genius, the only one who mattered. But now he was forced to confront the undeniable truth that this unassuming woman, whom he had tried to destroy, might just understand his world better than he did. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to stir within him. Respect. Live television is a high-wire act performed without a net. And one night, the wire snapped. Right in the middle of a live broadcast, a crucial video playback system failed, plunging the studio screens into darkness and throwing the entire show into chaos. Alarms blared in the control room. Producers screamed into headsets. The carefully constructed illusion of seamless entertainment shattered into a million panicked pieces. On stage, Louis Spencer, the unflappable TV host, froze. For the first time, his teleprompter was blank, his producers were silent in his ear, and he was utterly lost. Panic is contagious, and it spread through the crew like wildfire. People were running, shouting, unsure of what to do. The show was seconds away from a catastrophic meltdown on live national television, a disaster that could tank careers, starting with Louis'. In this vortex of chaos, a single point of calm emerged. It was Melissa Russell. While everyone else was losing their minds, she was perfectly, eerily composed. The secret producer instinct, honed over years of crisis management, took over completely. She strode calmly to the frantic stage manager, her voice cutting through the noise. "Kill the mics on the judges panel," she commanded, not with a shout, but with an unshakable authority. "Cue the house band to play. Get me a handheld camera and route it to the main broadcast feed. Now." The stage manager, white-eyed and desperate, simply nodded and relayed the orders. There was no time to question who this contestant thought she was. Her confidence was so absolute that it inspired action. She was a leader taking charge. She then walked directly to the center of the stage, where Louis was standing like a deer in headlights. She grabbed a spare cue card and a marker from a startled PA. "I'm going to interview the band's drummer," she said to Louis in a low, steady voice. "He's got a great story about his first drum kit. It'll fill 3 minutes. Your job is to laugh at my jokes and ask him one follow-up question. Can you do that?" Her clear, simple instructions were a lifeline, and he clung to it. He just nodded, his mind still reeling. The woman he humiliated was now directing him. What followed was a masterful piece of television improvisation. Melissa, with a natural ease that was breathtaking, conducted a charming, funny, and entirely unplanned interview, buying the technicians the precious minutes they needed to fix the problem. She showcased a side of herself no one had seen, a charismatic and quick-witted presence that felt more like a seasoned TV host than a nervous contestant. The crew and Louis watched in stunned silence. It was an unbelievable surprise, a display of grace under pressure that was nothing short of miraculous. When the technical glitch was finally resolved and the show cut to a commercial, a wave of relieved applause swept through the studio crew. They weren't clapping for the fix, they were clapping for Melissa. She had single-handedly saved the show from disaster. Louis stared at her, utterly speechless. Everything he thought he knew about her and about himself was wrong. She wasn't just kind. She wasn't just smart. She was a natural-born leader, a commander in a crisis. The power dynamic between them had just been irrevocably, seismically altered, right in front of his eyes. The fallout from the near disaster on live TV was swift. Not in the way anyone expected. The network praised the team for their grace under pressure, but behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. The incident had put the show under a microscope, and the show's biggest sponsor didn't like what they were seeing. They had been tracking social media sentiment, and the trend was alarming. The public perception of Louis Spencer, the charming TV host, was beginning to sour. People were starting to call him a bully, arrogant, and out of touch. The sponsor, a family-friendly soda company, called an emergency meeting. Their brand was built on positivity and fun, and they were getting nervous about being associated with Louis' growing reputation for nastiness. They delivered an ultimatum to the network: either clean up the show's image, starting with its host, or they would pull their multi-million-dollar sponsorship deal at the end of the season. For the network executives, this was a coded emergency. The show could survive bad ratings, but it could not survive losing its main financial backer. When the news reached Louis, it hit him like a physical blow. For his entire career, he had been untouchable. His talent, his charm, and his ratings had been a suit of armor. He had always believed that as long as he delivered the numbers, his behavior didn't matter. But now, for the first time, he was being told that it did. The world wasn't just judging his performance, it was judging his character. The threat wasn't about a bad review, it was about the complete collapse of the empire he had built. He suddenly felt a profound and terrifying vulnerability. The sycophants and yesmen who surrounded him were useless, offering empty platitudes and blaming everyone else. He looked at his reflection in the dressing room mirror and saw not a king, but a man standing on a trapdoor, hearing the latch begin to click open. His career, which he had always seen as an unstoppable rocket, was suddenly ingenuine, undeniable. Trouble, the sense of invincibility that had defined his life, evaporated, leaving behind a cold, unfamiliar fear. This crisis forced him to confront a truth he had long ignored: his persona was a liability. The very arrogance that he believed was part of his star power was now the thing that could bring him down. It was a cruel plot twist, a dose of karma delivered not by a wronged contestant, but by a corporate balance sheet. The game had changed, and he didn't know the new rules. The ground beneath his feet was shifting, and he felt completely and utterly alone in the ensuing earthquake. Desperate and shaken, he found himself thinking about the one person on set who wasn't afraid of him, who treated him not as a star or a monster, but simply as a person, Melissa Russell. The woman he had mocked, the contestant he had tried to get kicked off the show. In a world of fake smiles and terrified subordinates, she was the only one who had shown him an ounce of genuine, unfiltered honesty. And in his moment of crisis, she was the only one he felt he could possibly talk to. One evening, long after the studio had emptied out, Louis found Melissa packing her guitar in a quiet corner of the stage. He hesitated, a war raging inside him between his pride and his desperation. Swallowing what was left of his ego, he approached her, his usual swagger completely gone. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his voice softer and more uncertain than she had ever heard it. The powerful TV host looked lost, diminished by the weight of his own world. It was a surprise to see him so unguarded. Melissa simply nodded, her expression open and non-judgmental. They sat on the edge of the stage, the ghost lights casting long shadows across the empty seats. For a long time, Louis just stared into the darkness, struggling to find the words. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, to admitting weakness. His entire life had been a performance of strength and control. But the fear of losing everything was a powerful truth teller, forcing him to face the man behind the mask. "They're going to fire me," he said finally, the admission hanging in the air like smoke. "The sponsors think I'm a monster. And the worst part is, I think they might be right." It was a shocking confession, a crack in the fortress of his ego, so deep it seemed to shake the very foundations of who he was. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, emotional plea for understanding. "I created this character, this arrogant jerk. And it worked. God, it worked so well. But now I'm trapped inside it. I don't know how to be anyone else." He told her about the pressure, the constant need to be on, to be witty and cutting and larger than life. He confessed that the persona that had made him a star had also isolated him, leaving him surrounded by people who either feared him or wanted something from him. He admitted that his treatment of the crew, of the contestants, of her, was a defense mechanism, a twisted way of keeping everyone at a distance, so they couldn't see the insecure man who was terrified of being seen as average. It was a raw, unfiltered moment of truth. Melissa listened without interruption. She didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. She simply gave him the space to be honest, a gift no one had offered him in years. When he finished, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She didn't condemn him. She saw not the celebrity who had humiliated her, but a man who had lost his way, a prisoner of his own making. Her silence was not one of judgment, but of deep, empathetic understanding. In that quiet moment, confiding in the contestant he had wronged, Louis felt a strange sense of release. He had shared his biggest fear with the person he had treated the worst, and she hadn't used it against him. She had simply listened. For the first time, he wasn't Louis Spencer, the TV host. He was just Louis, a man in trouble, talking to a woman who seemed to possess a wisdom and grace that he desperately needed. The first step toward overcoming his own demons had been taken. And surprisingly, she was the one holding the lamp to light the way. After he had laid his soul bare on that empty stage, Louis braced himself for the inevitable. He expected either pity or a lecture, perhaps even a satisfying "I told you so" from the woman he had so publicly mocked. What he got instead was a level of insight that left him speechless. Melissa didn't talk down to him as a contestant would do a powerful TV host. She spoke to him as an equal, a peer, her words cutting straight to the heart of his problem with a clarity that was both startling and profoundly helpful. "Your problem isn't that you're a monster, Louis," she said, her voice calm and measured. "It's that you've forgotten why you fell in love with this job in the first place. You're so focused on the performance of being a host that you've stopped connecting with people. That character you play isn't a suit of armor, it's a cage. The audience, the sponsors, They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the cage. Her analysis was so sharp, so accurate. It felt less like advice and more like a diagnosis. She didn't just point out the problem, she offered a path forward. You don't need a new persona. You need to let a little of the real Louis show through. The man who's scared, yes, but also the man who must have, at some point, loved music and storytelling. Let people see that. Stop performing and start sharing. It was surprisingly insightful, the kind of advice a seasoned producer or a therapist might give, not a simple singer had plucked from obscurity to humiliate. It was a genuine surprise that revealed a depth to her he was only beginning to understand. For the first time in years, Louis felt truly seen. She wasn't looking at the celebrity or the brand, she was looking at the man behind them and speaking to him directly. It was a powerful, disarming, and deeply emotional experience. In her eyes, he wasn't a commodity whose image was declining. He was a person worth helping. This act of grace, coming from someone who had every reason to despise him, was the most profound act of justice he had ever experienced, not of punishment, but of restorative empathy. As they continued to talk, a new feeling began to blossom in his chest, something warm and unfamiliar that pushed aside the fear and arrogance. He found himself admiring her intelligence, her strength, her unwavering moral compass. He was captivated by her genuineness in a world that was suffocatingly fake. This wasn't just respect or gratitude, it was deeper than that. He was starting to develop real feelings for her, for the incredible person she was. A quiet, unexpected love story was beginning to write itself in the shadows of the empty stage. He left the studio that night a changed man. The crisis with the sponsor still loomed, but it no longer felt like the end of the world. It felt like an opportunity. Melissa had given him not just advice, but hope. She had shown him a door out of the cage he had built for himself. He realized that overcoming his professional crisis and overcoming his personal demons were the same thing. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't do it without her. The night of the live finale arrived, buzzing with an electric tension that was about more than just crowning a winner. For Louis Spencer, it was Judgment Day. The network executives were watching, the sponsors were watching, and the entire country was watching. But as he stood backstage, waiting for his cue, the only person he was thinking about was Melissa. Her words had been his guide all week. He had a choice to make. He could put on the old mask and perform, or he could take the biggest risk of his career and be real. When the show began and the cameras found him, something was different. The trademark smirk was gone, replaced by a look of quiet solemnity. Instead of his usual high-energy, joke-filled monologue, he held up a hand for silence. "Folks, before we get started tonight, I need to say something," he began, his voice steady but laced with an uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I've been doing this job for a long time, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what's important. I let the pressure and the ego get the better of me." He then did the unthinkable. The famously arrogant TV host apologized. He didn't make excuses or blame the pressures of the industry. He owned it. "I have been unkind," he said, looking directly into the main camera, as if speaking to every viewer personally. "I have been arrogant and dismissive to my crew, to the talented artists who graced this stage, and to many people who deserved my respect. My behavior was unacceptable, and for that, I am truly and deeply sorry." It was a powerful, emotional speech, stripped of all artifice. He specifically mentioned his treatment of contestants, the way he had mocked and humiliated people for sport. He didn't name Melissa, but everyone who had been following the show knew who he was talking about. "You come here with a dream, and my job is to honor that dream, not to use it as a punchline. I failed in that duty, and I promise you, and I promise myself, that I will be better." It was a moment of profound public accountability, a step toward a personal and professional overcoming that no one saw coming. The control room was in stunned silence. The producers, the network executives, even the crew Varian was speechless. This was not in the script. This was real. This was a man trying to earn his redemption in front of millions. It was a massive gamble. It could be seen as a desperate, pathetic plea to save his job, or it could be seen as a moment of genuine transformation. But for anyone who had seen the subtle changes in him over the past few weeks, it felt like the latter. It felt like the beginning of justice. Inspired by Melissa's integrity, he had chosen the harder, more honest path. He had torn down his own persona on live television, leaving himself completely exposed. He didn't know if it would be enough to save his career, but as he finished his apology and the studio audience sat in a stunned, pin-drop silence before breaking into tentative applause, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had finally told the truth, and whatever happened next, he knew he had done the right thing. During the first commercial break after his on-air apology, Louis immediately sought out Melissa. He found her in the wings, watching the stage with her usual quiet intensity. The weight of his public confession was still heavy in the air, but when he approached her, his steps were lighter than they had been in years. He needed her to know that his speech wasn't a calculated move to save his job. It was for him. It was because of her. "I meant every word of that," he said, his voice earnest and low, "just for her to hear. I needed to say it. You made me realize what kind of man I'd become, and I just couldn't be him anymore." He looked at her, his eyes full of an emotion that went far beyond simple gratitude. "Whatever happens after tonight, whether I still have a job tomorrow or not, it doesn't matter. Meeting you, Melissa, has been the most important thing to happen to me in a very long time. You changed me for the better." He confessed that he had never respected anyone more than he respected her. Not the network heads, not the famous celebrities, but her contestant he had once mocked. "You have more integrity, more strength, and more talent in your little finger than I have in my entire body," he admitted, a small self-deprecating smile on his face. "You stood up to me when no one else would, and you showed me kindness when I deserved nothing but contempt. That takes a kind of courage I can only dream of." This was more than an apology, it was a declaration. It was the final, complete surrender of his ego. He was no longer the all-powerful TV host addressing a lowly contestant. He was a man, flawed and humbled, speaking to the woman who had become his moral compass. The seeds of the love story that had been planted on that dark stage were now in full bloom, nurtured by honesty and mutual respect. The air between them crackled with an unspoken understanding, a deep emotional connection that had been forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Melissa listened, her expression soft. She could see the genuine transformation in him, the profound shift from arrogance to humility. She reached out and briefly touched his arm, a simple gesture of acceptance and acknowledgement. "What you did out there tonight, Louis," she said softly, "that took real courage too." Her validation was the only verdict that mattered to him in that moment. It was a quiet affirmation that his journey toward overcoming his past was real and recognized. He felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He had finally done the right thing, and the person whose opinion he valued most had seen it. As the break ended and they were called back to their positions, a sense of peace settled over him. He had laid his cards on the table. He had faced his demons. Now all that was left was the final verdict. But for the first time, he felt ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. Justice, he was learning, wasn't about winning or losing, but about becoming the person you were meant to be. The final moments of the show arrived. The votes were in, and the winner was about to be announced. But before that could happen, Louis was interrupted by the network president walking onto the stage, a rare and dramatic occurrence. "Louis, before we crown our winner," the executive began, a serious look on his face, "we have another announcement." As you know, this show has faced some challenges. We've decided to take it in a new direction, under new leadership. Please welcome our new executive producer. A hush fell over the audience. The crew exchanged confused glances. Louis's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment of his public execution. He braced himself for the worst. And then from the wings, Melissa Russell walked out onto the stage. Not as a contestant with a guitar, but as a poised, confident executive. The simple dress was gone, replaced by a sharp, elegant power suit. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. What was going on? This was a plot twist. No one, absolutely no one, had seen coming. For the past few months, the network president announced, Melissa Russell has been working undercover to get an honest look at this show's strengths and weaknesses. She is the brilliant secret producer we hired to save this program. The revelation hit the studio like a bolt of lightning. The crew, the judges, the audience, Ryan was stunned into silence. Louis just stared, his mind struggling to process the information. Melissa, the quiet contestant, the woman he had humiliated, was the producer? His boss? It was impossible. Melissa stepped up to the microphone, her calm authority radiating through the studio. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I've learned a lot these past few months. I've learned that this show has a talented and dedicated crew, and an audience that believes in the power of dreams." She paused, then turned her gaze directly to Louis. "I've also learned that people can change." The weight of her words, of their shared history, hung between them. Then came the final verdict, not for the contestants, but for Louis. On the strength of that, the network has agreed to renew the show for another season, she announced, and a wave of relieved cheers erupted. She held up a hand for silence and delivered the final blow. On one condition: true change needs to be proven. Therefore, Louis Spencer will be staying on as host, but he will also be taking on the role of co-producer, working alongside me every single day. The word justice had never sounded so terrifying and so merciful at the same time. Louis was utterly, completely, and profoundly speechless. The world tilted on its axis. The woman he had mocked, the woman he had tried to have fired, the woman he had just bared his soul to and was falling in love with, now held his entire future in the palm of her hand. It was the ultimate karma. His redemption wasn't going to be a one-time apology. It was going to be a daily act of earning back trust and respect, under the watchful eye of the very person he had wronged. His jaw hung open as he stared at her, realizing his journey of overcoming was only just beginning. And so, we come to the end of this incredible journey. What a powerful reminder that the person you mock today might just be the one signing your checks tomorrow. We've witnessed a story that's about so much more than a simple plot twist. It's about the collision of arrogance and integrity, and the beautiful, messy process of redemption. We saw a man who was humbled, a woman who revealed her power not through anger but through grace, and an unexpected love story that proves that sometimes the path to justice is paved with forgiveness and a second chance. The final scene, where the secret producer is revealed, leaving a Onsamite TV host utterly speechless. It's a moment of karma for the ages, but it also raises so many questions, and I would love to hear your thoughts on them. What part of this story impacted you the most? Was it the initial, painful moment of humiliation, or the quiet satisfaction of seeing Melissa's plan come to fruition? I truly want to know what resonated with you. And let's be honest, did you see that ending coming? Or were you as surprised as Louis was? Tell me in the comments if you were satisfied with the outcome, Louis and Melissa working together, or if you were secretly hoping for a harsher form of revenge. Do you believe his change was genuine and that this partnership will work? There's no right or wrong answer, and I'm curious to see what you all think about this tale of overcoming. If this story moved you and made you think, Please show your support by giving this video a like. It helps us know that we're on the right track. And please, don't forget to follow our channel and turn on notifications, because we have so many more powerful stories like this one coming your way. We also have a whole library of past videos I think you'll love, so feel free to explore them after this. Thank you for being a part of our community and for sharing this time with us. Well, see you in the next one.